He thought she'd blink. He thought the lights, the cameras, the rapid-fire interruptions would throw her off balance. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't come to play defense. She came with a folder, and when Piers Morgan tried to corner her, live, on air, before millions, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. She flipped the entire conversation in 12 seconds flat. What happened next didn't just silence the studio. It sent shockwaves through Congress, cable news, and every living room in America. Because in that moment, what you saw wasn't just a political clapback. It was a masterclass in preparation, in poise, in knowing exactly what's coming, and being 3 moves ahead. It's easy to mock, to mansplain, to interrupt. But it's much harder to withstand the facts delivered calmly, with precision, and zero room to escape. And that's exactly what she did. Now, a quick note before we dive in. Though this is a dramatized account crafted for storytelling and public commentary, it's built on real emotional truths about power, gender, and what happens when the underestimated come prepared. This isn't just about a headline, it's about a pattern, a reckoning, a moment that says the rules have changed, because when AOC leaned in and said just one sentence, the one Piers didn't see coming, the energy in the room collapsed. The audience stopped breathing. And Piers, he went silent, on his own show, live. So now the question is, what exactly did she say? And why did it hit so hard? Stay with us. You're going to want to hear every second. The air inside Studio 4 of Talk TV had the stillness of a premeditated strike. You wouldn't know it from the outside, a bland glass building tucked between corporate towers in central London. But inside, beneath the grid of LED rigs and carbon black sound panels, a moment was about to unfold that would be dissected in classrooms, courtrooms, and cable news cycles for years. 3 cameras were live, one on a mechanical arm slowly gliding right to left, catching the gleam of the host's silver cufflink. Another perched steady, focused on the wide shot. 2 chairs, 1 glass table, 1 nation waiting to pounce. The lighting was cold, icy white, deliberately sterile, like a surgical theater. It rendered skin unforgiving, exposed even the smallest twitch. The kind of lighting that could slice through makeup and confidence alike. And that's exactly how Piers Morgan liked it. He sat alone at first, fingers loosely interlocked, back straight, jaw set in that signature blend of smugness and certainty. His voice, when he spoke to the producers, was almost bored. "She'll try to be clever," he said. "Let her. We'll chop it in post if she gets too dramatic." To Morgan, this wasn't a risk. It was just another trophy to mount. Another liberal target to corner, belittle, and broadcast. He had done it 100 times. Senators, celebrities, scientists, even royalty. And now it was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's turn. What he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that AOC had already seen the entire board. This wasn't a live interview to her. This was a checkmate in progress. When she entered, she didn't wave to the camera, didn't glance at the producers behind the glass. No pre-show banter, no theatrics, just a nod to the floor manager, then a single deep breath before lowering herself into the chair opposite Morgan. And then she placed her handbag softly on her side of the table. AOC looked calm, yes, but not passive. Her eyes didn't wander. They held his gaze with a quiet kind of gravity, like a courtroom attorney who knows the jury is already leaning her way. Her blazer was tailored deep maroon, sharp lines over a midnight black blouse. Her hair was neatly pulled back. No flashy pins, no statement earrings, just precision. Morgan offered his hand. She shook it, briefly, enough for civility, but nothing more. The countdown began. 5, 4, 3, red light. Mic's hot. "Good evening and welcome to Piers Morgan Uncensored," he said with theatrical confidence. "Joining me tonight is Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, known for stirring the pot in Washington and for going viral more than governing." He leaned forward slightly. The grin widened. "Let's see what she's brought with her tonight." What she had brought was silence. At first, she smiled, not smugly, not nervously, but with surgical intent. Then with no word spoken, she reached into her bag. Slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a flat black document wallet. No logo, no label, just clean edges and a gold clasp. She set it on the table between them, parallel to her water glass. No explanation, no announcement, just the folder, sitting there like a sealed verdict. In the control room, a producer blinked. Was that cleared? Was what cleared? The folder. She wasn't supposed to bring anything on set. The camera operator zoomed, slightly, instinctively. Viewers at home would see it, not know why, but they'd feel it. Morgan's eyes flicked to the object, then back to her. Prepared, are we? He asked casually. Still no answer, but the air had shifted, and if you paid attention, if you really listened, you could sense it. Something had just started, and no one could stop it now. The document wasn't open, but the story was. And somewhere, just off camera, the countdown to the most public legal ambush in modern broadcast history had begun ticking down, second by second, heartbeat by heartbeat. This wasn't a segment, it was an execution. Piers Morgan's voice sliced through the room with a rehearsed levity. Do you always come this armed for TV interviews, Congresswoman? He nodded slightly toward the black folder AOC had just placed on the glass table, its surface still unopened, yet humming with unspoken tension. Alexandria didn't flinch. She didn't even look down at the folder. Her reply came steady without a trace of irony. I come prepared when truth is expected to defend itself. It was a sentence sharpened by experience, from Bronx housing courts to congressional oversight hearings, and it landed not with volume, but with weight, the kind that turns the air denser, tighter. Piers smirked, brushing the moment aside. Right. Well, let's get into it then. You've become something of a performance icon on the Hill. Flashy hearings, viral videos, passionate monologues. Some would say that's more activism than actual governance. Alexandria tilted her head slightly, considering his framing. If doing my job publicly is unsettling, she said, perhaps the problem isn't with the cameras, but with what they've been catching. He shifted, not visibly but internally. She wasn't defensive. She wasn't trying to explain herself. She was controlling the frame, flipping implication into indictment. Morgan pressed on. You've gone head-to-head with justices, Pentagon officials, and even fellow Democrats. You often speak as if you were the only adult in the room. Don't you think it's a little arrogant for someone who's never chaired a committee? This time, she didn't respond right away. Silence, her new opening weapon. Then evenly, when a fire alarm rings, we don't ask if the person pulling it is a senior firefighter. We listen. And when a system is on fire, I'll raise my voice, whether I have a gavel or not. Morgan's brow creased. He wasn't used to answers that didn't invite interruption. He pivoted. Let's talk about your background. You're not a constitutional scholar. You didn't graduate from Harvard Law, and yet you speak with certainty about legal matters far beyond your pay grade. Alexandria leaned forward just slightly, a movement more surgical than confrontational. I'm a licensed attorney. I've litigated civil rights cases in federal court. I passed the bar without a trust fund, without legacy admission, and without calling in favors. What I speak with is not pedigree. It's precision. The phrasing was deliberate. Pedigree versus precision. AOC wasn't just defending herself. She was dismantling the very hierarchy Morgan stood on. He tried to chuckle. Okay, so you've got credentials. But a lot of people, even your critics, say your real talent isn't law or policy. It's theater. Alexandria didn't blink. If holding corrupt officials accountable is theater, then maybe we've misunderstood what public service is supposed to look like. Maybe transparency feels performative to people who've spent too long hiding behind closed doors. In the control booth, a producer murmured, "She's flipping everything he throws at her." Piers was running out of space. He grabbed his next card, a pre-written set of claims. "Let me ask this," he said. "Reports suggest discrepancies in your campaign finances, undisclosed donations, questions about lobbying groups, even investigations into your academic records." There it was. Alexandria's gaze shifted, only slightly. But it was enough. The atmosphere tightened. The black folder remained untouched, but its presence swelled. "Mr. Morgan," she said quietly. Are you stating those as facts? Piers faltered for the briefest of seconds. I'm simply raising what others have reported. But are you, on this live broadcast, affirming them as facts? The room chilled further. That wasn't a question. That was a setup, a legal trap lined with velvet. Morgan tried to sidestep. These are allegations. The public has a right to know. No, she said. The public has a right to the truth, not repetition, not innuendo, and certainly not slander dressed up as journalism. She placed both hands gently on the table, palms down, fingers relaxed. The movement wasn't confrontational. It was grounded, like a closing argument about to be delivered. I don't mind being criticized, she continued. Criticism comes with the job, but there's a difference between disagreement and defamation. You know that, or at least your legal team does. In the silence that followed, the sound engineer swore he could hear Morgan swallow. This was no longer an interview. It was a chessboard, and AOC had stopped playing defense 3 moves ago. Morgan leaned back slightly. Let's not get too sensitive. Alexandria cut in. Not loudly, not sharply, but with steel. I'm not sensitive, Mr. Morgan. I'm accurate. And that accuracy is what will matter when accountability arrives. She glanced once at the folder. Still unopened, still untouched. But now every viewer watching could feel it. What was in there? How much had she brought? Why hadn't she opened it yet? And, more urgently, what would happen when she did? That tension, that waiting. That's what made this moment unforgettable. Because everyone thought they were watching a debate. They were wrong. They were watching a strategy unfold. And Morgan, for all his years behind the desk, was about to realize the next move wasn't his. It never had been. And let's be honest, Piers said, leaning forward slightly, his tone growing more confident, more reckless. When there are questions about a congresswoman's ethics investigation, or even the authenticity of her academic credentials, people deserve answers, not more speeches. The sentence hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. For a moment, there was no sound. Not from the cameras, not from the booth. Even the ever-present whir of the cooling system seemed to falter. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't respond right away. She just looked at him. The pause was calculated, perfectly timed, not just for dramatic effect, but to give the weight of his words time to settle into every ear, every corner of the broadcast room, and most importantly, into the record. Then she blinked, just once, not slow, not fast, just deliberate. Would you like to repeat that? She asked softly, under oath. Her voice didn't rise, it didn't need to, because what it carried wasn't volume. It was authority. It was legal intent. Piers blinked, confused at first, then annoyed. Oh, come on. I'm serious, she continued, cutting in with calm steel. You just alleged on live television that I am under ethics investigation and that I falsified my educational credentials. So I'll ask again, would you like to repeat that under oath? He chuckled, but it was thinner this time. Uncertain. It's a fair line of inquiry. It's defamation, she said. Now there was a shift in the studio. No sound effect. No dramatic music. Just silence. Cold, clinical silence. Morgan's eyes darted, to the folder, to the camera, to the control booth beyond the glass. No one was helping him. No one could. And AOC was just getting started. There is no investigation. There never was. My degrees are public. My bar admission is documented. And your producers know that because they contacted my office, and we sent them everything. 3 weeks ago. She didn't raise her voice. She slowed it, like a prosecutor laying out evidence in front of a jury that already suspected the truth. You received my law school transcripts. You received my ethics clearance from the Congressional Committee. You received confirmation of my campaign audit filings. And yet tonight, you chose to repeat a lie. Not as a question, but as a statement. Piers opened his mouth. She didn't let him. You didn't ask if the reports were true. You said I'm under investigation. You said I faked credentials. That's not inquiry, that's assertion. Her eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in exactness. And in case you've forgotten, Mr. Morgan, this isn't the U.S. Senate floor. There is no immunity here. And we are, quite literally, broadcasting across international borders. In the booth, the executive producer had stood up. His mouth formed the words, "cut to break," but no one moved. Everyone was frozen, staring at the live feed like passengers watching an engine catch fire mid-flight. Piers shifted in his chair, trying to recover his footing. "Look, No," she said, raising her hand gently but firmly. "You're not just anything. You're responsible for your words, especially when those words are weaponized, especially when you know they're false." She looked at the camera, not at Morgan, not at the crew, the audience. "You see, this is what they count on, that people won't fact-check the host, that no one will call them out when they say things like this, casually, confidently, knowing it'll live forever online, knowing it will be quoted in memes, clipped by bad actors, amplified by bots, and consumed by people who will never hear the correction." She turned back to him. "But that stops today." Morgan said nothing. For the first time in years, the man who made a career interrupting politicians, pundits, and prime ministers had nothing to say. Because in that moment, he wasn't hosting a show. He was sitting across from a case file waiting to open. She reached forward and placed one finger lightly on the folder. Still unopened, still quiet, but now unmistakably ominous. "You thought I came here for an interview," she said, "but I came here for clarity." The room felt colder. The lights felt harsher. The silence and deeper. "And clarity," she added, "sometimes requires consequences." For the first time in 20 minutes, the crew forgot they were filming a talk show. This wasn't entertainment. This wasn't debate. It was the beginning of a reckoning. And as the camera captured Morgan's lips parting to speak, only to close again without a word, the entire world leaned in, breath held, waiting. The chair across from him wasn't empty. It was loaded. And he had just pulled the trigger on himself. 3 months before the showdown, it started like most media attacks do, with a title. AOC's collapse in Congress. Watch the moment she lost control. The clip lasted 6 minutes. It showed no collapse, no outburst, just an edited segment from a subcommittee hearing where Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had calmly confronted a fossil fuel lobbyist about dark money and climate legislation. The original footage showed her walking through legal frameworks, ethics codes, and PAC contribution maps. The edited one, just her raising her voice mid-rebuttal, cut just before the lobbyist fumbled his papers. The caption below the video read, "Unhinged, unqualified, unfit." It was only the beginning. The Talk TV YouTube channel released 3 more videos that week, each framed with surgical malice. Liberal Lies Live, AOC edition. Truth or theater? What AOC doesn't want you to know. Did she really pass the bar? They all followed the same rhythm. Flashy thumbnails, bold fonts, sound bites over substance. No context, just clips cropped to humiliate, not inform. And Piers Morgan, sitting in studio under the glow of controlled lighting, repeated the same lines with increasing boldness. "She calls herself a lawmaker," he said on air, "but maybe it's time we ask. What laws has she really followed?" He smirked. The audience clapped. And across the Atlantic, inside a modest office on Capitol Hill, no one laughed. Because AOC didn't watch those clips in panic. She didn't tweet. She didn't respond on Instagram. She didn't release statements calling out media bias. She documented. One of her senior staffers, Elena, flagged each video, each quote, each timeline discrepancy. They started an internal spreadsheet labeled Pattern of Malice. At first, it was just a few rows. By week 2, it had tabs. By week 5, it had timestamps, transcripts, and matched rebuttal evidence for every false claim. It became a dossier, and then it became a case. AOC never raised her voice in the meetings. She didn't vent. She didn't get emotional. She asked questions. Has he ever corrected himself? Did they contact us for comment before airing this? Was the claim verifiable or just convenient? Each question was strategic, not defensive, calculated, because she wasn't just preparing for battle. She was building a wall of truth, brick by brick, while the other side mistook silence for surrender. What the producers at Talk TV never understood, and what Piers never bothered to consider, was that AOC's greatest political asset wasn't her voice, it was her memory. Every smear became a note, every accusation became a tab, and when Morgan, weeks later, made the mistake of accusing her on air, of faking credentials, of being under investigation, of hiding financial ties, he was stepping onto a minefield that had been mapped out in advance. But none of that could be seen yet. All the public saw was a woman who wasn't fighting back. And that was part of the brilliance. Because Piers, like many before him, confused silence with weakness. And that's exactly what Alexandria needed him to believe. Inside her team's private server sat a folder titled Talk TV Exposure, complete with metadata logs, audio backups, and digital receipts. One clip showed a Talk TV producer asking AOC's office about her legal education. Her staff had responded within 2 hours, with transcripts, bar certification, and verification letters. 2 days later, Morgan went live and said, some even question whether she actually earned that degree at all. The emails were there. The proof was archived, and so was the intent. This wasn't just carelessness. It was deliberate disregard. And in American law, that's the difference between journalism and defamation. Her chief of staff, a former litigator himself, leaned back in his chair one Friday evening, watching Morgan's latest segment. You know, he said, the more he talks, the better this case gets. AOC didn't smile. She nodded once and replied, let him keep talking. Because every video, every lie, every sarcastic flourish that played well to Morgan's base was being collected, time-stamped, categorized. They were writing their own deposition, one soundbite at a time. The goal wasn't revenge, it was reform. The question wasn't if there would be a reckoning, but when, and how loud it would echo. Back in the studio, as Morgan sat beneath spotlights, rehearsing his gotcha questions and preparing his smirk, he remained blissfully unaware that the person across from him wasn't just a guest. She was the architect of his undoing. The office wasn't large, but it didn't need to be. It was the kind of room where decisions were made, not announced. The walls were lined with printouts, each marked in yellow, red, and blue highlighter. Dates, quotes, context, contradictions. Clips played silently on 3 monitors mounted above a whiteboard that had long since run out of space. One screen showed Piers Morgan laughing during a segment titled AOC's Ethics Bombshell. Another displayed a grainy screenshot of an email from producer@talktv.co.uk, subject pre-interview request, Ocasio-Cortez segment, message, we want her to defend herself if she dares. At the center of the table sat Elena, AOC's senior communications counsel, flipping through a stack of annotated transcripts. On her left, Javier from legal was reviewing federal defamation precedent. To her right, Marie, the youngest staffer in the room, was cross-checking Piers' claims against source documents, bar admissions, financial disclosures, ethics memos, even C-SPAN footage. Alexandria stood near the window, arms folded, listening. She hadn't said a word in nearly 10 minutes, and then, quietly, she broke the silence. Let them come loud, she said. We'll answer with silence and statute. The room froze for a beat. Elena looked up. Javier sat back. They all knew what she meant. She wasn't going to post a rebuttal thread. She wasn't going to storm onto Twitter with a viral quote card. This was bigger. It wasn't about clapping back. It was about setting precedent. And for the first time, they all knew. They were going to court, but not just court. They were going to serve, and not by mail, not by a clerk. They were going to serve on camera. Live. Because if Morgan had chosen to assassinate character on air, then justice, real justice, deserved to land in the same spotlight. Javier looked up from his notes, eyebrows raised. You want to serve him? During the interview? AOC turned to face them. No, I want to serve him the moment he says something he knows is false. Not before, not after. I want it framed by his own words. Mari whispered. That's never been done before. Then let it begin with us, she said. The room shifted. It wasn't excitement, it was focus. They started preparing the complaint that night. Each count was grounded in law. Defamation per se for the false accusations of fake degrees, false light for the repeated implication that she was under criminal scrutiny, intentional interference with official duties, as her team had spent weeks fielding press inquiries based on lies. But this wasn't just legal paperwork. This was a narrative built from evidence, emails, clips, timelines, even metadata. Javier led the legal argument. Elena structured the delivery. AOC, she crafted the timing. If he opens with credentials, we let it go, she said. If he escalates to ethics or legality, that's the trigger. Mari, meanwhile, prepped a master folder, black, matte, no branding. Inside the complaint, proof of prior notice, transcripts from previous statements, and screenshots of all outreach ignored by Talk TV. On the third day of planning, an intern walked into the office with a question. Do we want to prep a press statement? AOC looked up from her notes. No, if we do this right, the clip is the statement. That was the ethos. No shouting, no overreach, just law, delivered in the same format where the damage had been done. Live, irreversible, and unforgettable. The last night before the interview, the entire team gathered one final time. They walked through hypotheticals. What if he backs off? What if he provokes harder? What if he tries to cut the feed? Javier held up the signed complaint. You sure you want to go through with service on air? It's a line. AOC replied, eyes steady. No, he crossed the line. We're just putting it on the record. And then she smiled. That kind of smile you see on trial attorneys seconds before the verdict is read. When men like this lie loud enough, long enough, they believe no one will ever challenge them on their own turf. But I didn't come here to debate. I came here to end a pattern. And just like that, the plan was in motion. The folder was sealed. The strategy was locked. And across the ocean, in a glass studio with cold lighting and warmer egos, Piers Morgan was prepping his next monologue, blissfully unaware that the real segment wasn't about her answers. It was about his words and what they were about to cost him. They didn't rush. They documented. With surgical precision, AOC's legal team dismantled each of Piers Morgan's falsehoods, claim by claim, lie by lie, accompanied by timestamps, transcripts, and contextual evidence that cut through spin like a scalpel. This wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a blueprint. Every line of the complaint was a quiet revolution, crafted not just for the court of law, but the court of public record. While Morgan's PR team scrambled to reframe his monologue as editorial opinion, AOC's attorneys did something rare in modern political warfare. They respected the process. No bombast, no exaggeration, just facts. And facts, when organized this well, don't need to shout. They thunder. The defamation suit was structured like a prosecutorial takedown. Each section bore the logic of a former Bronx prosecutor who understood how to turn arrogance into evidence. When Piers questioned her intelligence on live TV, they countered not with outrage but with records, academic honors, congressional speeches, committee briefs. When he accused her of stoking division, they listed bipartisan bills she co-sponsored. When he claimed she was anti-American, they attached her veterans' housing proposal, the same one his network never covered. But the most damning section came last. In it, AOC's team laid out not just how Morgan's statements were false, but how they fit a broader media pattern that weaponized race, gender, and intellect as tools to punish women who dared to lead unapologetically. The documentation was chilling. A side-by-side timeline showed how Morgan had interrupted female guests 5 times more frequently than male ones, how his show's most-watched clips often involved diminishing women of color. The conclusion was unavoidable. This wasn't a one-time opinion. It was a strategy, a pattern, a choice. Behind the scenes, AOC called the lawsuit a line in the sand for every public servant who's been slandered for having a spine, and she meant it. This wasn't about image. It was about precedent. If she stayed silent, she knew others would be punished for doing what democracy demands, speaking truth without apology. So she did what she'd done since her first debate on the House floor. She turned defense into narrative. Every press interview was deliberate, every word chosen for its ripple effect. And behind closed doors, her team rehearsed not just legal strategy, but televised delivery. They trained like it was a Senate hearing. Lighting, posture, tone. They practiced silences, pauses, eye contact. Not for vanity, but because they understood. The truth lands harder when it's said with control. The media called it unconventional. Her team called it preparation. AOC wasn't just preparing to sue. She was preparing to reclaim the frame, to take back the space where women like her are often talked over, misquoted, or reduced to viral clips that miss the deeper point. And when the day came, she was ready. She didn't walk into that CNN studio like a guest. She walked in like someone who knew she belonged there. No entourage, no makeup team, just a folder and a voice. The host tried to soften the moment. "You know Piers. He's provocative." She replied, "Provocation isn't a defense for defamation. If I shouted fire in this studio, it wouldn't matter whether I meant to provoke or just entertain. The damage would be real either way." The quote made headlines, but what followed made history. In the days after the filing, thousands of young organizers flooded social media with the hashtag line in the sand. Veterans, teachers, local leaders, each shared their own story of being dismissed, distorted, or disrespected. Not for what they said, but for who they were when they said it. And suddenly the lawsuit wasn't just about Piers. It was about all of it. The talk show culture that treats women as punchlines. The media pipeline that values sound bites over substance. The assumption that public women must absorb abuse as part of the job. But AOC didn't absorb. She responded with law, logic, and luminous calm. Some called it calculated. Others called it political theater. But those who'd been underestimated before, they saw it for what it truly was. A masterclass in using your platform to protect your principles. And buried inside that 37-page lawsuit, amid the citations and exhibits, was a deeper message. One the cameras didn't catch, but the country did. You don't get to lie about someone's character just because they challenge your comfort. Because when AOC filed that suit, she wasn't just defending her name. She was defending the idea that dignity is not optional for women in power. And now, with a trial date looming and every network scrambling to frame the moment, there's one question America can't stop asking. What happens when the woman they tried to silence becomes the one they have to answer to? On live TV. Stay tuned. This story's only just begun. Piers Morgan cleared his throat theatrically, glancing sideways at the main camera, as if inviting the audience in on a secret. AOC remained still, her posture upright, her eyes tracking him without blinking. Not aggressive, not wary, but exact. Morgan leaned forward, his voice dipping into that familiar register, half mocking, half performative. "Congresswoman, your behavior in Congress has been called everything from juvenile to delusional. Even members of your own party have questioned your tactics, your tone, and frankly, your grasp of reality." The words came out like a challenge, a trap laced with insult. He was hoping for a reaction, a flinch, a raised eyebrow, a sarcastic retort. What he got instead was a pause. Then AOC smiled. Not a smile of condescension, not smug. It was the kind of smile that comes when the other side walks into a punch they've been warned about. "They used to say the same thing about civil rights leaders," she replied calmly. "Disruptive, disrespectful, dangerous. But sure, Mr. Morgan, let's compare notes. I'd be curious to see your footnotes on that analysis." Morgan blinked. That wasn't in the script. He shuffled his stack of cue cards, then reached down beneath the table and pulled up a brown folder stuffed with printed articles, notes, and highlighted segments. What he had previously called, in meetings with his team, the AOC arsenal. He began flipping pages, fingers quick, tone sharpening. "Let's look at a few examples, shall we?" He didn't wait for agreement. "You disrupted hearings with what some called dramatic monologues. You refused to yield time on multiple occasions, even against your own party's leadership. You accused Justice Alford of perjury without substantiating it on legal grounds. And you've posted at least 17 videos in the last 6 months that appear more like campaign ads than civic discourse." He tapped the paper with a pen, triumphant. So I ask again, how is this not performance over policy? Alexandria tilted her head. It's interesting, she began, her voice slow, thoughtful. You call it performance. I call it documentation. You call it theater. I call it transparency. The difference, Mr. Morgan, lies in intent. She leaned in slightly, just enough for the camera to reframe. When I speak in Congress, the American people are watching. And if that makes some uncomfortable, perhaps it's not because of the style, but the substance that can't be ignored. Piers interrupted. But even some progressives, she raised a hand gently. Let me finish. You're free to disagree with my tone, my tactics, even my presence in those rooms. But the numbers don't lie. I've co-sponsored over 100 pieces of legislation, led 3 subcommittee investigations, and exposed more regulatory loopholes than most first-term representatives get briefed on. So while some may not like how I speak, they can't disprove what I've said. The words were measured, clipped, sharpened. Morgan shifted in his seat. He returned to his folder. All right then, let's talk about facts. AOC sat back. This, finally, was the trigger she had been waiting for. Morgan began reading directly from the printed sheets, his tone faster now, almost frantic in its rhythm. In October, reports emerged questioning your legal credentials, whether your degree was fully earned or granted under non-standard academic conditions. There were also allegations of campaign finance irregularities and an inquiry by the House Ethics Committee. He was speaking too fast now, reading, not analyzing, rushing through what he believed were blows. But each word he said was being recorded, not just by cameras, but by intent. Alexandria said nothing, but her silence wasn't passive. It was a countdown. He kept going. Multiple outlets have cited anonymous sources claiming that your law license was inactive during part of your congressional campaign, that you accepted donations from lobbying groups under shell packs. That was the moment, a beat too far. She turned her head slightly, not to him, but to the camera, and spoke. I'd just like to note for the record that Mr. Morgan has now repeated on international broadcast at least 3 allegations that were not only proven false, but addressed directly by my office through his own production team. Morgan looked up, caught off guard. She continued, we provided documentation verifying my degree. We provided confirmation from the New York Bar Association. We disclosed every campaign filing. And yet, Mr. Morgan, you chose to proceed. Now she looked at him, director, unflinching. You didn't come here to find truth. You came here to manufacture drama. But the problem with that strategy is that eventually the drama turns real. Morgan fumbled with his pages. His composure cracked. Just slightly. This is journalism. No, AOC said. This is defamation, and you're on camera. Again. The air tightened. In the control booth, someone whispered, did he just cross the line? Another replied, if he didn't yet, he's about to. Because AOC hadn't opened the folder yet, but her hand had moved closer, and with every word Morgan added, he wasn't just making noise. He was making evidence. This wasn't a talk show anymore. It was a countdown to impact, and every viewer watching felt it. Piers cleared his throat and glanced down at his notes again, doubling down, unaware that he was speaking not into a studio microphone, but into the record of what would become an internationally scrutinized legal proceeding. And there are also questions, he said with a confident flick of the wrist, about whether your scholarship at Boston University was merit-based or preferential, about undisclosed financial connections to green energy PACs, about whether there is in fact an ongoing ethics investigation into your office's spending habits. He looked up with a smirk, expecting a flustered rebuttal, or perhaps a lecture on systemic bias. But what he got instead was stillness. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat motionless for a beat too long, the kind of silence that forces viewers to turn up the volume, thinking they missed something. But they hadn't. She was just choosing her weapon. Mr. Morgan, she began, her tone like marble under pressure, you've now made 3 distinct claims. 1, that I faked or inappropriately received an academic scholarship. 2, that I'm entangled in financial conflicts of interest. And 3, that I am under active ethics investigation by Congress. Piers gave a cautious nod. So let me ask you clearly, with cameras rolling, she continued, locking her gaze into his. Do you state these as facts? The question landed like a gavel. Not a hypothetical, not a dodge, a binary. Piers hesitated, just long enough for the audience to catch the stutter. These are allegations reported by others, he replied carefully. There's public concern. I'm not. She interrupted him, gently but surgically. That's not what I asked. Now her voice was colder, clinical. Are you stating those allegations as fact, Mr. Morgan? Or are you retracting them now? Morgan glanced at his notes, then back at the camera, unsure of the trap he had stepped into. I'm saying there's smoke, Congresswoman, and when there's smoke, there's often a smoke machine, she cut in, especially in a studio built on narrative, not evidence. She reached toward the black folder, but didn't open it. Not yet. Just slid it forward so it now sat directly between them. Let me walk you through the record, she said. Not the headlines, not the algorithms. The record. She raised one finger. On October 3rd, your producer emailed my office asking for details about my scholarship and whether it was merit-based. My chief of staff responded within 4 hours with full documentation from Boston University, including academic ranking and award letters. You acknowledged receipt. Another finger. On October 20th, your assistant producer requested clarification on a false rumor that I was being investigated by the House Ethics Committee. My office replied with a formal letter from the committee's chair, confirming that no investigation existed or had ever been initiated. Again, no response from your team. A third finger. On November 2nd, your booking agent sent a final inquiry about Green Energy PAC donations. We replied with a direct link to the FEC database, showing every dollar accounted for and zero conflicts. You didn't mention any of that tonight. She looked him in the eye. You left out the part where we gave you the truth. You chose the version that got more clicks. Piers opened his mouth. She raised her hand slightly. Let me finish. Her voice dropped half an octave. Low, firm, resolute. You didn't make a mistake tonight. You made a decision. You repeated things that had already been disproven. That's not journalism. That's defamation. And the law has a name for what happens when falsehoods are repeated knowingly and recklessly in public. She tapped the black folder. Actual malice. The control room froze. One of the junior editors whispered, She's prepping to file, isn't she? The director said nothing, just stared at the live feed. Piers leaned back. You're being dramatic, Congresswoman. No, she said. I'm being exact. You call it drama because you're not used to women like me arriving with documents instead of sound bites. Then looking into the camera. To everyone watching, this isn't about me. This is about a system where the lie gets the headline and the truth is buried in the comment section. She turned back to Piers. You've now repeated allegations you knew were false. You had the truth. You ignored it. And now, you've put it on record. Her hand slid over the folder. Still unopened. But the nation could feel it now. What was inside wasn't just evidence. It was accountability. And it was coming. Piers Morgan straightened the pile of papers in front of him with a forced calm, but the slight tremble at the edge of his index finger betrayed him. The smirk still clung to his lips, more out of habit than confidence now, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stared at him from across the glass table with the unblinking precision of a surgeon preparing for the first incision. She had just finished listing the dates, the emails, the documents sent, the proof ignored, the pattern repeated. Now her voice carried no outrage, no elevation, only a clarity that sliced deeper than any volume could. Mr. Morgan, she said evenly, I strongly advise you to reconsider your wording, because we are now in the domain of defamation. The sentence was almost quiet, but it detonated across the studio. The silence in the control room was no longer stunned. It was terrified. The assistant director stepped forward as if to say something, but the producer held up a hand. Don't interrupt this. Morgan leaned forward slightly, his smirk twisting, not in control, but in denial. Is that a threat, Congresswoman? AOC didn't blink, didn't smile, didn't flinch. She simply opened her leather satchel with one hand, pulled out a second folder, this one thicker, heavier, sealed with a tab, and placed it gently, precisely beside the slim black one already on the table. It landed with a soft thud, like a gavel falling. She didn't respond to his provocation. She didn't need to. The weight of the folder had done it for her. Morgan looked at it, then at her, then back at the camera. And for the first time since the segment had begun, he didn't know where to look. AOC leaned in slightly, her voice still measured. Let me explain something very clearly. This isn't about being offended. It's about recklessness. You were given facts. You were given confirmations. You were given legal clarity. And instead of adjusting your narrative, you doubled down on lies, while cameras rolled and millions watched. She tapped the folder once. A soft sound, but to Morgan, it echoed like a courtroom mic. That, she said, is how actual malice is established. Morgan exhaled, trying to play it off with a chuckle. Come now, let's not turn this into a courtroom drama. AOC looked at him. Deadpan. Director. It already is. The air dropped 10 degrees, and in that instant, the viewers, whether they were watching live on cable or scrolling through the live stream on their phones, felt something shift. It was no longer about whether Morgan was right or wrong. It was about whether he had just said the wrong thing to the wrong person in the most public forum imaginable. Still, he tried to press forward. Look, you're taking this too personally. It's journalism. My job is to ask questions, AOC cut in. No, Mr. Morgan, your job is to inform, to investigate, to verify. What you're doing is entertainment masquerading as journalism. And tonight, you crossed a line. She paused, just for a second, then delivered the line that would headline 1,000 think pieces by morning. And the thing about crossing lines is, some of them are legal. Morgan's face froze, because in that moment, it became abundantly clear. She wasn't bluffing, and worse, she wasn't even close to done. Her hands moved with quiet purpose as she opened the thick folder, revealing a neatly organized stack of documents. Tabs, highlights, legal seals visible even to the cameras. The cameraman instinctively zoomed in. The red light above lens 2 flickered. The producers knew this was no longer a conversation. It was an evidentiary display. AOC began flipping slowly, letting the pages breathe. Congressional memos, legal clearance letters, certified transcripts, FEC filings, bar admission confirmations, screenshots of emails, response time stamps, and at the bottom, a printed copy of the segment outline that Talk TV had submitted to her office weeks ago. You were told what was false, you were given what was true, and now, here you are, repeating it anyway, on the record. For views. Her hand stopped on one document. It had a blue post-it note on it. She tapped it with her index finger. This, she said, is the reply from the House Ethics Committee. The one your team ignored. She looked back up. And this, all of this, isn't a threat. It's a file, a record, a timeline of your choices. Morgan's mouth opened, but the words didn't come. Because suddenly even he knew. This wasn't a warning. It was the final moment before impact. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had just handed the audience and the world the key to understanding the next chapter. A chapter that wouldn't be debated. It would be filed. The folder opened with a quiet click. The sound of the metal fastener unlocking as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez parted the cover with calm, deliberate hands. No dramatic flourish, no need. What she was about to do required no spectacle, only truth. The studio's lighting, still cold and controlled, now seemed to glow too brightly on Piers Morgan's face, exposing the microshifts in his jaw, the faint lines on his forehead, the way his left hand subtly gripped the edge of the desk. His eyes flicked down at the folder, then back up at her. He was still pretending to be the host, but everyone else knew that role had just changed. AOC looked up, not with anger, not with a smirk, but with clarity that cut sharper than any insult. This isn't a threat, she said softly, her voice carrying with the calm weight of a courtroom verdict. This is a complaint There was a full second of complete silence before the camera operator, instinctively sensing what was coming, pushed the slider forward. Close up on the document's header, United States District Court, Southern District of New York Civil Action, number 24-CV-08742. A second camera snapped to a wider frame, catching Morgan's face as the realization hit him not all at once, but in phases: disbelief, confusion, and something very close to panic. The studio, once filled with Morgan's bravado, was now a vacuum. Even the live control room had gone mute. AOC continued, "This is a formal defamation suit filed against you, Mr. Morgan, and your network, Talk TV. The complaint details multiple instances of knowingly false claims aired to millions of viewers, including repeated assertions about the validity of my academic credentials, ethics violations that never occurred, and fabricated financial ties." Morgan tried to speak. His lips parted. Nothing came out. "This action alleges defamation per se," she continued, flipping the page, "as well as false light, invasion of privacy, and intentional interference with public duties. The suit includes transcripts, emails, metadata, and prior communications with your production team, which establish clear and repeated notice of the truth." Another flip of the page. Calm, methodical. "Your team was warned. Evidence was provided. Corrections were requested. Instead, you chose to amplify falsehoods for entertainment value." Morgan finally stammered out, You're filing this live?" AOC didn't miss a beat. "I'm serving it live. The complaint has already been filed in federal court. But as your defamatory conduct occurred on this very platform, in front of this very audience, I find it only appropriate that the notice of service match the scale of the offense." She turned the document around and slid it across the glass table toward him. The camera didn't move this time. It didn't need to. The moment was etched. Morgan looked down at the front page. His name, bold and unmissable, beneath the seal of the federal court. He didn't reach for it. He didn't touch it. He just stared, as if hoping it might disappear. AOC leaned back slightly, her voice softening, but only in tone. "In America," she said, "we don't silence the press, but we also don't allow them to weaponize lies without consequence. You have every right to challenge my ideas, my policies, even my vision for this country." She paused. "But you don't have the right to fabricate stories about who I am and expect no one to answer." Morgan blinked rapidly. "This is insane." She tilted her head slightly. "No, Mr. Morgan. What's insane is how long people like you have gotten away with it. That ends here." There was a beat, a breath, and then she added, quieter now, but no less firm, "You've just been served." The control room erupted in whispers. The social media team, watching the live feed from a second monitor, was already clipping the moment. By the time Morgan reached for the water glass, his hands were visibly shaking. And AOC, she calmly closed the now empty folder, placed it back into her satchel, and looked straight into the lens. "We deserve a media that informs, not one that inflames. And tonight, I didn't come here to debate lies. I came here to end them." 10 seconds of silence followed. Not one, not two, 10. No outro music, no voiceover, no transition graphic. Just Morgan's stunned expression frozen on screen. As the numbers on the view count began to climb by the thousands per second, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez placed both hands on the table, fingers spread, her posture steady like a prosecutor in closing argument. The folder lay open before her, a carefully stacked fortress of evidence, precision, and intent. Across from her, Piers Morgan sat unusually still. No sarcasm, no retort, just that slow draining color from his face as each page turned like a countdown clock. AOC began reading. Count 1. Defamation per se. For knowingly broadcasting false claims that directly impugn my professional qualifications and personal integrity. Specifically, repeated statements asserting that I falsified my academic records and bar admissions. She flipped to the next page. Count 2. False light, by portraying me through curated segments and commentary in a misleading and publicly damaging context. This includes selective editing, framing my actions in Congress as juvenile or delusional, and suggesting connections to illegal lobbying activities. Morgan shifted in his seat, his mouth opening slightly, but no words came. The smirk had vanished. In its place, quiet panic. AOC's voice remained level. Count 3. Intentional interference with public duties. Due to the manufactured controversy that forced my office to redirect staff resources away from legislative work toward responding to unfounded media attacks. She paused, letting the final count sit in the air like a weight. Then she looked directly at him. These aren't talking points, Mr. Morgan. They're legal charges, and every single one is supported by correspondence your team received and ignored. She pulled a small bundle of stapled pages from the folder and placed them gently on top of the complaint. Here's the email from October 3rd, when your producer asked about my academic background. We responded that same afternoon with complete documentation from Boston University, including my honors ranking, scholarship details, and confirmation from the registrar's office. She placed another set beside it. October 20th, inquiry about alleged ethics investigations. We sent back a signed letter from the House Ethics Committee explicitly stating no investigation was open, nor had one ever been initiated. Another page. November 2nd, you asked about donations from climate advocacy PACs. My staff sent you full FEC records, all publicly available, showing compliance with every reporting regulation. You didn't acknowledge the email, but 4 days later, you aired a segment titled, "What is she hiding?" Her hand hovered over the final document, a single page centered in bold text. And here is a time-stamped copy of your segment outline, submitted by your team on November 9th. It included questions that referenced those same disproven allegations, meaning not only were you aware of their falsehood, you pre-scripted them. The silence was brutal, because everyone watching, in the studio and homes online, understood what that meant. This wasn't speculation, it was strategy. Morgan swallowed hard. We receive a lot of material, Congresswoman. I can't control every producer. That's convenient, AOC said. But the truth isn't inconvenient. It's just stubborn. Her voice sharpened just slightly. You had multiple chances to correct the record. You didn't, because you weren't interested in truth. You were interested in traction, in outrage, in virality, and that's not journalism. That's a business model built on distortion. She leaned forward slightly. It's not defamation if it's true, but when it's false and repeated, that's not free speech. She let the pause linger, then delivered the next line like a closing statement. That's a business model. Morgan tried to interrupt. You're twisting this, but she was already flipping to the next page. The suit demands $20 million in damages, proportional to the harm inflicted across an international audience, compounded by your platform's refusal to correct statements even after evidence was presented. Morgan recoiled, voice cracking. 20? You can't be serious. Dead serious, she replied. The studio's lighting no longer flattered him. His shirt clung slightly to his back. A single bead of sweat trailed from his temple. AOC continued, her voice now charged, not with rage but with purpose. This is not about silencing criticism. It's about ending impunity. I've endured weeks of personal threats, office disruptions, and online smear campaigns, all rooted in statements you knew weren't true. That's not debate. That's damage, and the law recognizes the difference. She closed the folder. But even then, the energy didn't fade. It tightened. Maybe this is new to you, accountability, but where I come from, when someone lies about your name, your work, your record, you don't yell, you don't retaliate, you stand, you document, and you fight back with truth and the law. And then, almost as an afterthought, almost, she added, I look forward to discovery. The studio dropped into a kind of spiritual silence, the kind you feel in courtrooms before a verdict is read. This wasn't performance, it was precedent, and every viewer knew they weren't watching a show anymore. They were watching the beginning of something irreversible. For a moment, it looked like time itself held its breath. The folder was closed. The allegations had been read, the facts laid bare. But Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wasn't done. Not yet. She reached into the inner pocket of her blazer with slow, deliberate control, like someone retrieving not just a document, but a reckoning. And then, in a voice not raised but refined like tempered steel, she said the words that would be replayed 1,000,000 times in the next 24 hours. Piers Stephen Morgan. Piers blinked, slow and uneven. The sound technician instinctively adjusted the gain. The audience wasn't sure whether to breathe. You've just been officially served. She placed a sealed envelope, white, minimal, lethal, in the center of the table. Not thrown, not slid. Placed, as if even gravity had to respect it. Camera 2 zoomed in, a slow, cinematic glide that caught the faint twitch in Morgan's jawline. His lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Across his face, you could see something rare in the world of live television, the flicker of actual consequence. There was no applause, no dramatic music, just the cold mechanical whir of cameras, the silence of the crew, and the tight mic picking up the sound of his fingers, subtly fidgeting under the desk. AOC sat back, not to retreat, but to anchor herself into what came next. She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. Her expression carried something more dangerous than triumph. Certainty. "This isn't a debate segment," she said softly. "It's a timestamp." The silence in the studio had a shape now, rigid, unforgiving, and social media, as if on cue, began to ignite. Within minutes, the clip was being trimmed, captioned, posted. The phrase "Piers Stephen Morgan, you've just been officially served" trended on 5 continents. Legal experts weighed in. Commentators scrambled for context. Late-night writers scrapped entire monologues just to rewrite around this one scene. Because it wasn't just a lawsuit, it was a reversal. For years, the formula had been predictable. Loud hosts, louder accusations, and truth left gasping in the edit room. But in this moment, this broadcast, that arc snapped. The aggressor became the defendant. The set became a courtroom. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't just fight back, she rewrote the rules of the encounter. Morgan finally found his voice, but it came too late, like a man trying to unspill ink. "This is performative. You're trying to humiliate me." AOC didn't flinch. "I'm trying to educate you, and everyone watching." Her voice remained calm, but her message was flame. "You don't get to drag reputations for ratings and then retreat behind the word opinion. You don't get to weaponize misinformation and call it provocation. And you certainly don't get to profit off defamation while pretending to interview." She pointed to the envelope. "That is a consequence, not a stunt. And I'd advise you to treat it with the seriousness it demands." The host stared at the paper like it might bite him. And in a way, it already had. Legal scholars would later call it the most publicly visible civil complaint service in recent broadcast history. PR firms would call it brand fracture in real time. But millions of viewers, average citizens who'd been lied to, gaslit, and dismissed by similar media machines, they had another name for it: justice, on camera. As the interview wrapped, no one reached to shake hands. AOC simply stood, tucked the folder beneath her arm, and looked once more at the host who had underestimated her intellect, her patience, and her resolve. And then she said, almost like an epilogue, not to him, but to the audience itself, "Some truths whisper." This one chose to echo. She walked off set with the same calm intensity she entered with. The camera held on Morgan's face, drained, glassy, unreadable. It would become the screenshot of the year. Behind the scenes, the producers scrambled. The floor manager muttered into his headset. But the viewers? They weren't going anywhere. Because this wasn't just content. This was vindication, televised. And somewhere in living rooms across the country, people hit rewatch, then share, then subscribe. In just 24 hours, the video shattered the internet. 12 million views trending across 5 continents. The moment AOC slid the legal envelope across the desk and called out, "Piers Stephen Morgan, you've just been officially served," became digital legend. By sunrise, the hashtag #AOC Serve Piers had turned into a cultural wildfire, top trend in the US, UK, Canada, and India. Memes multiplied, commentators scrambled, TikTok lawyers broke it down frame by frame like it was the Zapruder film. Everyone had an opinion, but one fact was inescapable. AOC hadn't just shown up. She'd shown receipts. Talk TV executives woke up to chaos. Investors panicked. Viewers flooded the network's switchboard with calls, not of support, but of disbelief. The network's stock dropped 12% before noon. Advertisers pulled campaigns. A breaking chyron on BBC simply read, "Talk TV hit with truth," and a lawsuit. And while the media machines scrambled to spin the damage, AOC said nothing. No press release, no tweet, just silence. And one still frame of her calmly looking across the desk at a man unraveling on live television. That image alone was shared over 300,000 times in under 8 hours. It wasn't just a scandal, it was a reckoning, and the world was watching it unfold in real time. By noon, the glass doors of Morgan and Frost LLP slammed shut, not to keep reporters out, but to muffle the yelling inside. Piers Morgan had called his legal team the moment the clip hit 5 million views, screaming that the video was malicious, doctored, and legally inadmissible. But his tone wasn't that of a confident client. It was of a man cornered. Meanwhile, AOC hadn't said a word. Not to the press, not on Twitter, not even through a spokesperson. Her team didn't need to speak. They just uploaded. First came an internal production log, leaked line by line. Then a full audio track from the green room, confirming who edited what and when. And finally, the gut punch, a file labeled pre-tape confirm call.mp3. It was Morgan's voice, loud and clear. "We know it's shaky, but it'll trend. Trust me, no spin could erase that." Harvard Law's Media Ethics Department posted a simple reaction within hours. "We'll be citing this case in classrooms for the next decade. It's a masterclass in what not to do." Across cable networks, talking heads tripped over themselves trying to reframe the narrative. But every time they tried, a new receipt dropped. Emails, timestamped Slack messages, a spreadsheet of planned Twitter posts tied to the viral segment. It was no longer just a PR crisis, it was a dismantling. And AOC still silent. Because sometimes when the truth is loud enough, you don't need to raise your voice. The backlash didn't unfold, it detonated. By the third day, YouGov polls in both the US and UK revealed a seismic shift. 74% of respondents now supported legal consequences for media outlets that deliberately distort interviews or public figures' statements. That wasn't just a policy position, it was a cultural turning point. Talk TV remained silent, but the industry didn't. NBC declined Morgan's appearance. Sky News quietly shelved a segment they'd pre-booked with him. CNN replaced him last minute with a media ethics professor. The message wasn't subtle, it was surgical. In private, some executives called it the reckoning we always saw coming but never scheduled. In public, a seasoned British reporter put it more bluntly. Piers built a career out of crossing lines. AOC didn't need to yell, she just redrew the line, with a pen in the Constitution. What made it unforgettable wasn't the volume of the fallout, it was the clarity of it. AOC hadn't gone on a revenge tour, she hadn't dropped a merch line, she hadn't even posted a victory tweet. Her silence said what needed to be said. The truth wasn't just louder, it was stronger. For once, justice didn't come from a court, it came from a camera, and millions were watching. The audio didn't just leak, it erupted. A 43-second clip, grainy and unedited, surfaced on a Reddit forum at 2:11 a.m. London time. Within hours, it spread like wildfire across X, formerly Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. The voices were unmistakable. Piers Morgan's team, just before the interview. "We know it's shaky," one producer said, "but it'll trend. That's the job." Another voice chimed in, half joking, half panicked. "She's smarter than we expected. Cut it in post. Tighten it up." By noon, millions had heard what was never meant to be heard. Proof that the ambush wasn't spontaneous, but scripted, manipulated, and meant to provoke a misstep they never got. The backlash was swift, but it was the resignation letter that changed the tone of the moment. A senior production staffer, anonymous until that day, publicly quit, posting an open letter to AOC. I was part of a machine that chose virality over truth. We planned to shake you, to make you stumble. Instead, you stood, and we collapsed. I'm sorry. The letter went viral on its own, not because it exonerated AOC, but because it exposed the industry itself. Inside media circles, it triggered a cold wave of self-examination. A memo leaked from another British outlet revealed their own editorial meetings had discussed the AOC incident as a lesson in what not to orchestrate. Talk TV stayed quiet. Their legal department was already hemorrhaging statements. But AOC, she didn't gloat. She didn't even post a comment. She went back to work, introducing a new bill in Congress to strengthen protections for media manipulation victims. No press conference, no hashtags, just policy. And that silence, it roared louder than any retweet. Critics who once called her too loud now sat stunned at what she did with restraint. She hadn't just won a PR battle, she'd shifted the moral compass, not with a viral quote, but with unshakable calm and evidence that spoke for itself. One Columbia journalism professor summed it up on national radio. This isn't just a moment, this is a new standard. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez didn't just defend herself. She held a mirror up to an entire industry and dared it to look. And people did look. Then they looked again. And the more they saw, the more undeniable it became. Truth wasn't optional anymore. It was expected. This wasn't just a leak. It was a rupture. And in the silence that followed, AOC's integrity became the loudest voice in the room. The morning had been planned with military precision. Piers was set to reclaim control, a press conference at a discreet but high-profile London venue, prepared remarks, strategic leaks to soften the fallout. The goal, reframe himself not as the aggressor, but the victim of an overreaction. But by 9:12 a.m., the press conference was dead, not postponed, dead. The PR team stopped returning emails. Journalists who had RSVP'd began tweeting statements of withdrawal. One prominent outlet published a leaked message from a sponsor's legal team. If he speaks today, we walk. No exceptions. By 9:27, the venue canceled outright, citing unforeseen security risks. In reality, they'd seen the headlines and wanted no part in what was about to become a cultural funeral. Piers was cornered, not by mobs or media, but by a woman who refused to play the game quietly. AOC hadn't said much since the broadcast imploded. While Piers fumbled through reaction videos, speculative defenses, and pre-scripted rage, she simply waited. Then right as the press conference collapsed, she posted a 9-second clip. Just 9 seconds, no filter, no camera crew, just her, standing outside the Capitol, a breeze catching the edge of her coat, the backdrop of America behind her, and then the line. They told me to be quiet. They forgot who they were talking to. She didn't name him. She didn't have to. The internet did that for her. In hours, it was dubbed the sentence that buried the microphone. Reaction clips exploded across TikTok, Twitter, even LinkedIn. Teachers printed it on classroom walls. One news anchor whispered it before going live. A quiet nod to the power of restraint. That single clip unraveled whatever narrative Piers had tried to spin. Because no statement, no damage control, no pre-written apology could compete with the sheer moral gravity of a woman speaking truth without yelling. It was grace. It was fury. It was composed combustion. Behind the scenes, British and American media executives scrambled. Lawyers met. Publicists bailed. Producers leaked internal Slack messages. One reading, "This isn't a firestorm, it's a collapse." Meanwhile, in law schools, the case was already being taught. Harvard's Media Ethics Symposium sent out an early draft. Morgan vs. Truth when spin met silence. The balance of power had shifted, not through lawsuits or legislation, but through one woman refusing to shrink. AOC wasn't grandstanding. She was reminding the world of what power really looks like, not in domination, but in direction. Not in volume, but in velocity. And as she walked off camera in that 9-second clip, she didn't look back. Because when you're walking toward justice, you don't need to. They thought it would end with a check. Talk TV's lawyers sent the first email on a Sunday morning, cloaked in legalese and polite urgency. "We acknowledge the misunderstanding," it began, offering a discreet path forward. No admission of guilt, no public statement, just a sum significant enough to silence most, and a promise to move on. But AOC didn't enter politics to move on. She entered it to move through. Her team read the offer in silence. The number was large. The clauses were airtight. It would all vanish. The slander, the distortion, the trauma, with one stroke of a pen. And that was exactly the problem. AOC didn't need their money. What she needed was sunlight, because what was done to her was not a private accident. It was a public choice, filmed, edited, approved, and aired under the full glow of broadcast power. So she replied, not through back channels, not through lawyers. She posted one line to 18.3 million followers. "I won't settle in the shadows for something you did in the spotlight." Within minutes, it was trending globally. Within hours, it was framed on dorm walls, union offices, and the break room of a small newsroom in Tulsa, where a young journalist whispered to her coworker, "She's fighting for all of us." Inside Talk TV, panic. What was meant to disappear quietly had become a beacon. Piers, already reeling from the collapsed press conference, now found himself the face of a modern reckoning. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every anchor, every executive, every institution that thought they could shape truth to fit narrative, then bury the consequences beneath cash in NDAs. But AOC refused to be buried. She had learned that injustice doesn't die in the dark. It metastasizes. And the only antidote is public truth told loudly, clearly, and with absolute refusal to flinch. That week, AOC gave no interviews, no grandstanding, just action. Her legal team filed notice of refusal, and her statement became required reading in media law classes before the case had even closed. Columbia Journalism Review ran a headline, "The Woman Who Declined the Settlement and Redefined the Standard." Behind the scenes, a producer from another network sent her a message. "Every woman in this industry owes you a drink or a microphone." But AOC didn't drink to victories like this. She planned with them. And while the world praised her resolve, she sat with her team drafting something far more enduring than a press quote. A fund, small at first, seeded from the same money she could have accepted in silence, now redirected to empower truthful journalism led by those most often silenced. Because to her, this was never about vengeance. It was about clarity, about reminding the world, if they come for your voice on national TV, you don't whisper in return. You step forward, you speak cleanly, and you say what no institution expects. You don't own my silence. And just like that, the spotlight shifted. No longer on the smear, no longer on the man who delivered it, but on the woman who turned a trap into a torch and carried it forward for every voice they tried to dim. It didn't end in the courtroom. It ended on air. Talk TV issued a formal public apology. The network confirmed Piers Morgan's departure within 24 hours. But AOC didn't cash the settlement check. She redirected every dollar into a new scholarship, the Truth in Journalism Fund, designed for young reporters who refused to trade integrity for virality. At the launch ceremony, she stood before a room of cameras and simply said, "You don't have to lie to be heard. You just have to be brave enough to tell the truth." And with that, she handed the mic to the next generation. They didn't just watch. They wrote. From Texas to Vermont, thousands of students sent letters. You protected more than yourself. You protected the truth. At Columbia Law, AOC walked into a packed auditorium where the crowd stood before she even spoke. No teleprompter, no cue cards. Just her voice, measured, resolute, unshakable. She didn't speak long. She didn't have to. Her final line echoed louder than any viral clip. Never mistake volume for value. Say less, but mean it all. In that silence afterward, everyone understood. The fight wasn't over. It was just becoming theirs. No crowd, no cameras, just footsteps echoing on marble floors. AOC entered the Library of Congress alone, carrying a crimson leather-bound copy of the legal filing, its spine worn from the battle, its weight heavier than paper. She paused at the archive chamber, placed it gently on the shelf reserved for historic cases, and ran her fingers across the gold-etched title plaque. It read, "Filed, fought, won, for truth." As the door closed behind her, the screen faded to black. But across the nation, 1,000 lights were just being lit. When AOC placed that leather-bound file into the Library of Congress, it wasn't just a legal record, it was a message. Truth doesn't whisper, it echoes. In a world built on sound bites and spin, she chose the long game. No mic drop, just legacy. Her final act wasn't about applause. It was about accountability. That moment wasn't just the end of a fight, it was the start of a new standard. And now we ask you, if you had one truth the world needed to hear, would you stay silent or speak it, even if your voice shook? If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Alexandria Rising Stories, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Alexandria Rising Stories.